I'm Danica Lorer, and this is Lit Happens, your celebration of the literary arts here in Saskatchewan. Today I'm very pleased to welcome Amy Jo Ehman. Amy, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Danica.
So can you tell me a little bit about yourself to start off?
Sure. I'm a Saskatchewan girl, right down to my roots. Grew up on a farm, and my hometown is Craig, and went to college, became a journalist. That was my career at CBC Television and Radio before I became a freelance writer. And as a freelancer, you can follow your passions or your interests, and so that's kind of where my two books kind of came out of that period of my life, where I'm just free to write about whatever I feel like.
And so food. You must be passionate about food.
I'm passionate about food in the same way I think that many of us are. We eat. We want to eat well. We want to know where our food is coming from. And being from Saskatchewan, my interest started out in wanting to know what foods we produced here. I knew that Saskatchewan was a farming economy, but what was everything that was going on, and just researching that, and then having researched it, then wanting to eat it in my own home and going out and getting it. So yeah.
And so that must have led to your first book, Prairie Feast.
Yeah, that led to my first book, Prairie Feast. The genesis of this came out of a very cold, frigid winter day in about 10 years ago, and I had been doing this research about the foods that were being produced in Saskatchewan, and it's amazing what grows naturally here, or what we're growing. And I said to my husband, wouldn't it be kind of fun if we just for a year we just ate off the local bounty, off the foods of Saskatchewan? This predated the 100-mile diet, so that wasn't my motivation. My motivation was really to just know what we have here and find it. And at that time it was hard to find. There were no websites or directories, and farmers markets often didn't go in winter. How do you find the stuff and keep it on your plate? And so my husband said, yeah, sure, we could do that. And I said, well, what would you call a diet like that? And he said, you could probably call it boring.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So the challenge was on, wasn't it? How do you eat off the local bounty and not make it boring? Now it's funny to talk about it, because now it's become part of the lifestyle of so many, is to know what's happening around them and go to their farmers markets and buy local foods. But in doing the research and just bumming around the province and finding this stuff, I also was just really delving into the food traditions that we have here. The potluck dinners and picking Saskatoon berries and rink burgers and all those sorts of things that we do here when we grow up in Saskatchewan.
And so what are some of your favorite things that you found while that you may not have eaten as a child when you were looking around?
I grew up in Saskatoon berry country. I had no idea there were blueberries in Saskatchewan. No idea. When I discovered blueberries, I was blown away, because of course half this province is the north, and that's where blueberries grow. They're way easier to find in the north than blueberries in the Saskatoons in the south. So I was thrilled to find blueberries. And the mushrooms, I went mushrooming with someone who knew what we were doing out there, and to discover and most of them is chanterelles and morels and pine mushrooms. They're just shipped out of here. The markets for them are somewhere else, and they are expensive somewhere else. So if I could get my hands on them for a decent price here in Saskatchewan, why not?
And then the second book, you've gone a little bit further back in time, and I started to read it, and I love story, and you have the stories of the people who lived here and the food that came with them when they came from other places. So can you tell me a little bit about this book? Yeah,
Out of Old Saskatchewan Kitchens is out of the old kitchens in Saskatchewan, and the book kind of is in two parts. The first part, my history geek side, got to come out, and I looked at Saskatchewan's early history through the lens of food and retold that story, not through the politicians and the headlines and the major dates, although they're all in the background, but who were the people who were feeding their families, and what were they eating. And the whole reason for Saskatchewan to become what it is was food production. It was a wheat-growing powerhouse from the beginning. And so that was our raison d'etre. And so many aspects of our history can be retold through that lens of food. For instance, the reason that the politicians in Ottawa decided they had to clear the Aboriginal population off the land was so that farmers could farm it, so we could grow food. The treaties that they forced the Aboriginal people into signing were agricultural documents at their base. It was to allow them to have the ability to grow their own food on the reserves that were set aside for them. So it included potatoes and hoes and oxen and things like that. Many of those promises broken. They never received those things. And in order to get the Aboriginal people to sign treaties against their will, they were basically starved. There was a policy of starvation out of Ottawa that we're not going to have food relief for anyone who refuses to sign a treaty. So all along the way, you can tell stories like this too. Even the genesis of the Métis uprising of 1885 can be told through the story of an agricultural story of moving onto the land and wanting to grow your own food and live your own way.
So you must have found some really interesting stories about people from the original peoples, first peoples of this country, but also people who came from far away
From far away. When you think of all the Europeans that flooded in here with their traditional foods from back home. Some of those dishes, those traditional recipes, they could recreate here. Some they just lost. But I was so inspired by the dedication, mostly of the women of the time, right? The women were the ones who were cooking dinner and keeping the gardens, to keep up their traditional dishes and to find ways to do them here and to pass those recipes on to the next generation. It's just amazing how you can take a certain number of ingredients that are available here and recreate the dishes of so many different ethnic cultures right here in Saskatchewan. And many of those dishes are still cherished by families of those ancestors here today.
Well, and there's something really lovely. It's sort of like a photo album, a family album as well, because you have these photographs and you even have little scraps of handwritten recipes that are hard to read, and there are spelling mistakes, and there's a beautiful charm in that too.
Yeah.
So did you go through a lot of old recipe books to find?
I did. I went through old recipe books, but the other thing I did is I read memoirs of the time, particularly by women, because they would talk about the process of, you know, what they served for Christmas dinner or what they had for the harvest dinner when you were serving 15 or 20 men on the harvest crew. And then I was looking at old cookbooks to find recipes for the things that they said that they were cooking. You know, they didn't actually include recipes in their memoirs. And so that was great. And I also tapped into friends who provided some of the old photos and some of the old recipe cards that got reproduced in there. And I also tapped into my own family story, because there's pictures of my grandmothers in there and my mother as a young woman and some of my family recipes in there as well. I just love to bring myself into the book, because then it's a cherished family work for me and my family as well, but so many other people can find their own family roots in there as well.
Definitely, definitely. By sharing yourself, you've made that connection to us, and I think I want to go back and look at the recipes that my grandmother has left, and I know I cook many of the things that she cooked, but I don't have her original cards and her handwriting. So that's a really beautiful thing, and it's really a treasure. And if for some people who don't have that, to have this, it's a real gift to so many people. So I'm really sorry, Amy, but we're out of time already. These segments go by so quickly, but it's been such a pleasure to talk to you today.
This has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you, Danica.
Thanks, Amy. This is Amy Jo Ehman here on Lit Happens. Amy, where can we find your books? I forgot to ask.
Well, of course, McNally Robinson here in Saskatoon, but most bookstores, Coles and university bookstores, and yeah, around the province.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is Lit Happens. I'm Danica Lorer. You can find past episodes on YouTube by going to Shaw TV Saskatoon. You can catch me on Twitter or Facebook, or contact me on email at danicalorer@gmail.com. Thank you for watching.